The man standing at the edge of the garden had no reason to move. He didn't know her name. He didn't know her company, her title, or the war she'd been quietly losing all evening. All he saw was a woman standing alone in the middle of a crowded outdoor gala, surrounded by summer lights and the sound of laughter that wasn't meant to be kind. Her ex-fiancé had just told 100 guests into a live microphone exactly what he thought of her. "A woman like you, no one will ever truly love you." Nobody disagreed. Nobody moved. The garden stayed bright and the music kept playing as if nothing had just been broken in public. So Darius Vale set down his glass, walked across the garden and took her hand. If that opening stayed with you, if you felt something shift when that man stood up and nobody else did, stay with us. This story is only just beginning. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss a single chapter. And now let's go back to where it all started. The Solmere Resort sat at the edge of Lake Marrow like something out of a magazine spread. White linen tables arranged beneath trellises heavy with bougainvillea. Strings of warm gold lights looped between old oak trees. A small stage facing the water where a jazz quartet played soft enough that guests could still hear each other spend money. It was the kind of event where the invitation said fundraiser, but everyone understood the real purpose was to be seen by the right people at the right moment. The lake caught the last light of the summer evening and threw it back in ribbons across the surface. And if you didn't know any better, you might have called the whole scene beautiful. Darius Vale knew better than most that beautiful settings didn't always mean beautiful evenings. He had driven down from the north end of Marrow Bay, where his restoration shop sat on a gravel lot backing up to the water. The building wasn't much to look at from the road. Weathered siding, a hand-painted sign, 2 wide bay doors that stayed open most of the day. But inside there were wooden hulls being brought back from 30 years of rot, and classic car frames stripped down to bare metal and rebuilt from the frame up. It was slow work, honest work, the kind that left your hands sore and your mind quiet by the end of the day, which was exactly why Darius had chosen it after everything fell apart. He came to the gala because a former client had left a ticket at his shop with a handwritten note saying it would mean something if Darius showed up. He wasn't comfortable in rooms like this, rooms full of people who measured each other by net worth and zip code. But he respected the man who invited him, so he put on his good jacket, drove down the lake road, and told himself he'd stay an hour. He found a table near a row of old olive trees, ordered a club soda, and watched the crowd the way he always watched unfamiliar spaces. Quietly, without judgment, without hurry. That was when he noticed Celeste Varden. She moved through the garden alone, no assistant trailing behind her, no security visible wearing a white dress that was simpler than anything else in the room. She wasn't working the crowd the way most guests were. She wasn't stopping to press flesh or collect business cards or laugh too loud at someone else's joke. She had the focused stillness of a person who had come to accomplish one specific thing and intended to do it without drawing attention. Darius watched her scan the room twice, catch sight of someone near the far end of the garden, and begin moving in that direction with the controlled pace of someone who had already run the conversation in her head. She never got there. Adrian Sloan intercepted her before she reached the VIP section near the stage. Darius didn't know the man's name yet, but he read him instantly the way he moved into Celeste's path with the casual confidence of someone who believed his presence was always welcome, the way his smile was wide enough to perform, but never reached the muscles around his eyes. He was well-dressed, well-connected by the look of the people who glanced over when he moved, and he was clearly not surprised to see her. He had been waiting. What happened next took less than 3 minutes to destroy something that couldn't be easily rebuilt. Adrian didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. He guided Celeste toward the small outdoor stage, the way a person guides someone toward a conversation they don't realize is a trap. And by the time she understood the geometry of it, the stage at her back, the crowd angled toward her, the microphone live in Adrian's hand. There was nowhere to move without making a scene. He lifted his glass. He smiled. He spoke with the warmth of a man telling a charming story about someone he once cared about, which made what he said land harder than if he'd simply been cruel. He talked about ambition. He talked about control. He said that Celeste Varden was the most impressive woman he had ever met, and also the most impossible one to love. And he said it like it was a compliment, like he was doing her a favor by naming what everyone in the room had privately suspected. He said she was better with contracts than with people, better with strategy than with feeling. Then he delivered the line with the ease of a man who had rehearsed it and knew exactly what it would do. "A woman like you, no one will ever truly love you." The garden didn't go silent all at once. It went silent the way a room does when something embarrassing happens, in small, spreading patches. People stopping mid-sentence, glasses lowering, conversations trailing off as the words traveled across the space and arrived somewhere uncomfortable. A few people laughed quietly, the way people laugh when they want to signal they are not the target. Someone raised a phone. A couple near the hedge turned to look at the water as if something interesting had suddenly appeared out there. Celeste didn't move. She stood with her hands at her sides and her face controlled in the way of someone who had spent years learning that showing anything was dangerous. But her hands were not entirely steady. An event staff member in a white polo shirt appeared at her elbow, polite and firm, asking to see her VIP credentials. She had come without them, deliberately trying to move through the evening without drawing notice. The staffer wasn't being malicious, he was doing his job. But the timing of it, the request landing in the exact moment after Adrian's words, in front of everyone still watching it, turned a professional inconvenience into something that felt like the crowd itself confirming the verdict. Darius set down his club soda. He had not planned to move. He had told himself coming in that he wasn't here to get involved in anything, that he would sit quietly, pay his respects to the man who invited him, and leave before the evening got complicated. He wasn't naive about what happened when a man like him stepped into the middle of something like this. A black man from the working end of town, no title, no portfolio, walking into a dispute between people whose names moved money. He understood the math of that situation and what it tended to cost. But he had seen something in Celeste's face in the second after Adrian's words landed before she locked it back down. It wasn't anger. It wasn't humiliation in the way most people experience humiliation loudly and with heat. It was something quieter and older, the look of a person who had heard a version of this before and had spent a long time trying to prove it wrong, and was now standing in a garden full of people watching her fail to prove it again. Darius knew that look. He had worn it himself. He stood up, straightened his jacket, and walked across the garden. He moved without rushing, without any of the energy of a man building toward a confrontation. He walked the way he walked through his shop when something needed doing, directly, without drama. He crossed the flagstone path, past a table of guests who watched him go with the particular attention people give to something they can't yet categorize, and arrived at Celeste's side just as the staff member repeated his request for credentials. Darius looked at the staffer. Then he looked at Celeste. She was watching him with the careful, measuring expression of a person who had learned that strangers appearing at critical moments usually wanted something. Her eyes moved over him quickly, reading what she could, his jacket, his hands, the absence of a name tag or a drink, or any of the usual props of a man performing importance at an event like this. Darius extended his hand toward her. Not a handshake, an offer. She looked at it. A beat passed. Then she placed her hand in his and he closed his fingers around hers, steady and unhurried, and turned to the staff member. "She's with me." The staffer looked between them, recalibrated, and stepped back. 2 words said without aggression or theater, and the situation simply resolved. The crowd that had been watching was still watching, but the texture of it had changed. There was no longer a woman standing alone being asked to leave. There was a man standing next to a woman, and whatever this was, it was no longer the clean, easy spectacle it had been 30 seconds ago. Adrian's expression shifted. Not dramatically, the smile stayed, but the architecture behind it changed. He had expected Celeste to stand there or walk away or absorb it. He had not expected this particular variable. Darius didn't look at Adrian. He had nothing to say to him. He turned slightly toward Celeste and kept his voice low, meant only for her. "You don't have to stay in this part of the garden." It was not a rescue. It wasn't framed as one. It was just a practical observation about geography offered by someone who had no agenda attached to it. And that, more than anything, was what made Celeste let him lead her away from the stage, down the stone path toward the wooden dock at the edge of the lake, where the music faded behind them, and the water reflected the last color of the sky. Behind them, the garden buzzed back to life. People exhaled. Conversations resumed. Someone refilled someone else's glass. Adrian said something to the group nearest him and got a laugh, working quickly to reclaim the room's attention and reframe what had just happened as something he had controlled all along. But Celeste was no longer there to be the subject of it. And Darius Vale, who had come to this event to stay an hour and leave without incident, was now standing at the edge of a dock with a woman he didn't know, listening to the water move against the pilings, wondering what exactly he had just walked into and whether he would do it differently if he could go back. He already knew the answer. He wouldn't. The dock stretched maybe 30 feet out over the water, wide enough for two people to stand side by side without crowding each other. Behind them, the gala continued. The jazz quartet had shifted into something slower. The hum of conversation carried across the lawn, and the gold lights strung between the oaks threw a warm glow that made the whole scene look from a distance like nothing difficult had happened at all. Out here past the edge of the garden, the lake was dark and flat and indifferent, and that indifference felt for the moment like relief. Celeste stood at the end of the dock with her arms crossed, not defensively, but in the way of someone who had learned to take up less space in uncertain situations. She was looking at the water. Darius stood a few feet to her left, not crowding her, not waiting for her to perform gratitude. He had learned over years of working with things other people had given up on that the first thing you had to do was let something breathe before you touched it. It was Celeste who spoke first, and she did it the way she probably did most things, directly with the faint edge of someone who preferred to name awkward situations before they named themselves. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "I know," Darius said. She turned to look at him then, studying his face the way she had studied him back in the garden, looking for the angle, the motive, the thing he wanted in return. It was a habit she had probably developed so gradually she no longer noticed she was doing it. Darius didn't look away, and he didn't try to explain himself further. He just waited. "Most people in that garden know exactly who I am," Celeste said. "They didn't move." "I noticed," he said. She turned back to the water. "So why did you—" Darius thought about it honestly before he answered. He didn't reach for something that would sound good. "Because nobody should be made into a joke in front of a crowd," he said. "Doesn't matter who they are or what they've done. What he did up there, that's not about you. That's about him needing an audience." Celeste was quiet for a moment. Not the quiet of someone processing something new, but the quiet of someone hearing something they already knew, confirmed by a voice that had no reason to lie to them. "He wasn't entirely wrong," she said finally, and her voice was flat when she said it, factual, as if she were reading a line from a report. "I'm not easy to be close to." "That's not the same thing as being unlovable," Darius said. He said it like it was a verdict. "It's not a verdict. It's just a complaint from someone who wanted you to be easier." She looked at him again. This time the calculation in her eyes had shifted slightly, replaced by something more careful and less defended. She wasn't sure what to do with a stranger who spoke plainly, and that uncertainty seemed to unsettle her more than hostility would have. "You don't know me," she said. "No," he agreed. "But I didn't need to know you to see that what happened up there was wrong." The jazz from the garden drifted out to them soft and unhurried, and the lake moved in small, dark ripples below the dock. Celeste uncrossed her arms. It was a small thing, barely a shift in posture, but it was the first time since Darius had approached her that she looked like a person standing somewhere instead of a person bracing for something. She asked him what he did. Not what company he worked for, not who he knew at the event, what he did. The question came out more genuine than she probably intended, and Darius answered it simply. He told her about the shop, about the wooden boats that came in looking like lost causes and left looking like themselves again, about the way restoration work rewarded patience and punished shortcuts. He talked about it the way people talk about work they chose because it suited them, not because it impressed anyone. Celeste listened without interrupting. She asked one question, whether he enjoyed it, and the directness of the question, stripped of the usual social performance of asking about someone's career, made Darius smile slightly. "Every day," he said. Something in her expression shifted again, something smaller and less guarded than anything she'd shown in the garden. She opened her mouth to say something else, and that was when the evening changed for the second time. From back on the lawn, a voice rang out. Older male, carrying the natural volume of a man accustomed to being heard in large rooms. "Ms. Varden, Celeste Varden of Varden Biotech." The name landed across the garden like a stone into flat water, and the ripples moved fast. Darius watched it happen in real time. The guests nearest the dock turned first. Then the information traveled person to person, table to table, and the entire atmospheric pressure of the event shifted within the span of about 20 seconds. The staff member who had asked for her credentials went visibly pale. 3 men in dark jackets who had been gathered near the bar straightened and began moving toward the dock. People who had been laughing into their drinks a minute ago set those drinks down and looked in her direction with entirely new expressions: interested, recalibrated, eager. A woman near the trellis touched her companion's arm and whispered something, and her companion immediately turned to look. It was the same woman, same white dress, same dock, same lake. The only thing that had changed was that they now knew her name. Celeste watched all of it with the stillness of someone who had seen it before and had never once found it anything other than exhausting. The apologies started arriving within a minute. The staff member came down the path toward the dock with his chin low. The event coordinator appeared behind him, and 2 of the men who had been near the bar introduced themselves as board members of the charity and began talking about what an honor it was to have her there, their voices carrying the particular warmth of people who had recently been cold and were now overcompensating. Adrian was the last to move, and he moved the way a man moves when he realizes the story has turned against him quickly and with a new version already being assembled. He appeared at the edge of the dock and spread his hands in a wide, easy gesture, the smile restored to his face, his voice sliding back into something familiar and almost affectionate. "Celeste," he said, as if the last 20 minutes had been an evening between 2 old friends. "You know I was only being honest. That's something I always respected about us. We never pretended." Celeste looked at him with the controlled precision of someone who had already decided what they thought and had no intention of performing uncertainty for his benefit. "You weren't being honest," she said. "You were performing. There's a difference, and you've always known it." Adrian's smile didn't disappear, but the warmth behind it did. He looked between Celeste and Darius, and his attention settled on Darius the way attention settles on something it intends to reduce. "I don't think we've met," Adrian said, his voice shifting into the register of someone bestowing attention rather than giving it. "Adrian Sloan, you are—" "Darius Vale," Darius said. Adrian nodded slowly in the manner of a man filing something away. "And you're here because—" "He's with me," Celeste said. She said it without looking at Darius, without any of the performance Adrian would have recognized. She said it the way Darius had said it at the stage, clean and plain, as if it were simply the truth. Adrian absorbed this. His eyes moved to Darius again, and this time they carried a different message. The particular assessment of a man deciding how much of a problem something was going to be. He looked at Darius's jacket, his hands, the absence of a name tag or industry insignia, and drew the conclusion he had already arrived at before he looked. "A craftsman from Marrow Bay," Adrian said, keeping his tone light. "Standing in for the cavalry. That's very—" He let the word arrive with a tilt. "Gallant. A man who publicly humiliates a woman in front of a crowd he paid to be there," Darius said, "doesn't get to have an opinion about what's gallant." The people nearest them on the dock went quiet. Adrian's expression held, but the ease in it was gone, now replaced by something tighter and more deliberate. He wasn't used to being answered that way in public by someone he had already categorized. "You think you know what went on between us?" Adrian said. "I don't need to," Darius said. "What went on up there on that stage, I saw that. Whatever else happened between you two is between you two. But what he did up there was for the crowd, not for you." He said this last part directed to Celeste. And anyone who needs an audience to make a point isn't making a point. They're making a wound. Adrian said something else, then something about Darius looking for an angle about a man from a small lakeside shop, positioning himself near a powerful woman and calling it principal. He said it with the particular fluency of someone who had spent years framing narratives and knew exactly how to make a generous act sound calculated. Some of the guests close enough to hear were nodding slightly, not in agreement exactly, but in the way people nod when a story sounds plausible and they don't have enough information to push back. Darius felt it the shift the way the space was filling with a version of events he hadn't written and couldn't fully correct in the middle of a garden full of strangers. He understood then what staying would cost. Not him personally, he could weather the whispers, he had weathered worse. But the thing that had happened at that stage, the real thing, the simple and unperformative act of standing next to someone because it was right, would be absorbed into the noise of speculation and come out the other side looking like something else. Something transactional. Something that fit better into the story people at events like this preferred to tell about people like him. He looked at Celeste. She was watching him with an expression he hadn't seen on her before. Not the careful assessment of the doc, not the controlled blankness of the stage. Something quieter than either of those things and more honest. He told her he was going to head out. The words landed in a way he hadn't entirely anticipated. Something moved across her face. Not protest, not the entitled expectation of someone who assumed he would stay because she needed him to. It was something simpler than that and closer to loss. "Now," she said. "The reason I came over there was true," Darius said. "I want it to stay true. If I stand here while they decide what kind of story I am, it stops being about what it was actually about." Celeste looked at him for a long moment. Around them, the gala continued its slow redistribution, people gravitating toward her, toward the renewed status of her presence, toward the opportunity she represented now that they remembered what her name meant. "You're not what I expected," she said. "I don't know what you expected," he said, "but I meant what I said back there. You're not hard to love, Celeste. They just wanted a smaller version of you, and you wouldn't give it to them." He didn't wait for her to respond. He turned from the dock, walked back up the stone path through the garden past the olive trees and the bougainvillea and the guests who watched him go with the particular attention of people trying to categorize something they hadn't managed to categorize yet. And he kept walking until the warm lights of the Solmere Resort were behind him, and there was only the dark lake road ahead and the quiet, steady sound of the water. The clip was 47 seconds long. Someone had filmed it on a phone from somewhere near the hedge, shaky at the edges, but clear enough where it mattered. You could hear the microphone. You could hear Adrian's voice, smooth and unhurried, building to the line. You could see Celeste standing with her hands at her sides, and you could see, if you watched closely, the slight movement in those hands in the second after the words landed. The clip ended just before Darius crossed the garden, which meant the version the internet received was a clean, uninterrupted document of a woman being told she was unlovable in front of a crowd that did nothing. By morning, it had been viewed over 200,000 times. By the following afternoon, the number had tripled, and the story had split into two separate narratives running parallel on every platform. One version was sympathetic, the powerful woman cut down by a bitter ex, the familiar story of a man who couldn't handle a woman who didn't need him. The other version was less kind. It recycled every piece of existing commentary about Celeste Varden being cold, being difficult, being the kind of woman who inspired that kind of speech from someone who had once been close to her. Both versions agreed on one thing. The story was interesting, and neither of them was done with it. A second clip surfaced by evening, longer, steadier, taken from a different angle near the dock. This one showed Darius. It showed him walking across the garden, taking Celeste's hand, saying the words. It showed him and Celeste leaving together toward the water. It did not show the conversation on the dock or his departure or the hour that followed. What it showed was the moment extracted from context and made available for interpretation. And the internet interpreted it with the thoroughness it applied to everything it found compelling. The speculation ran in every direction. Some people called Darius a hero. Some called him calculated. A few outlets ran pieces with headlines that managed to be condescending to both of them simultaneously. The narrative of a working-class man from a small lakeside town who had stumbled into proximity with a wealthy and powerful woman, and what that proximity might mean for him. His shop was named in two of the articles. His neighborhood was described. His truck was photographed from the road by someone who had driven to Morro Bay specifically for that purpose. Darius read none of it directly, but he didn't need to. By Wednesday morning, 3 people had called the shop to ask about him, and one of them had identified herself as a journalist. He thanked her for calling, told her he had nothing to add to the story, and went back to work on the hull he had been sanding before the phone rang. What he couldn't work away was the quieter version of the question that had been sitting with him since he drove home from the Solmere resort. Not what the internet thought, but what he himself thought about the fact that he had walked into that garden, done something honest and uncomplicated, and watched it immediately become something else. He understood this intellectually. He had understood it before he did it. But understanding something before it happens and sitting with it after are different kinds of knowing, and the second kind was slower and less comfortable. He was still sitting with it when Celeste drove up. She arrived on a Thursday morning. No advance call, no assistant in a car that was understated enough to belong in Morro Bay without standing out. She parked on the gravel lot in front of the shop and got out wearing clothes that were nothing like the white dress from the gala, plain dark pants, a light jacket, her hair pulled back in a way that looked functional rather than composed. She stood for a moment looking at the open bay doors, at the wooden hulls visible inside, at the hand-painted sign above the entrance, and then she walked toward the shop the way she'd moved through the gala garden with intention, but without the performance of confidence. Darius was outside at the back edge of the lot checking the finish on a restored runabout he'd moved into the sun to dry. He heard the gravel and turned, and for a moment neither of them said anything. The lake was visible behind the building, moving in slow silver light, and somewhere down the shoreline a boat was running, the sound of the motor carrying across the water and fading. "I didn't call first," Celeste said. "I wasn't sure you'd pick up." "I would have," Darius said. She walked over to where he was standing and looked at the boat, really looked at it, the way people look at things when they need a moment before the actual conversation begins. The hull was pale cedar, the trim freshly painted, the brass fittings polished to a warm glow. It was the kind of object that communicated quietly how much work had gone into returning it to itself. "It's beautiful," she said, and she meant it. "Took about 4 months," Darius said. "Previous owner said it wasn't worth saving." Celeste looked at him. The line landed the way it was meant to without being pushed. She didn't make a comment about it, but something in her expression acknowledged it. They sat on the low wooden bench along the side of the building in the shade of the overhang and talked the way people talk when the careful version of a conversation has already been used up. Celeste told him what had happened after he left. The apologies that weren't apologies, the board members who had descended with their recalibrated warmth. Adrian's attempt to reframe the evening as a private joke between former lovers. She told him about the clips, the articles, the overnight transformation of a single evening into a media event with its own momentum. Then she told him about Adrian's actual play. He had been working the board for weeks before the gala, not overtly, but in the way he operated everything through suggestion and selective information through the patient cultivation of doubt. He had positioned himself with 2 key shareholders as a stabilizing alternative to Celeste's leadership, particularly now with the genetic therapy project approaching a critical funding stage and the public attention on her personal life at its most intense. He was arguing, in private conversations with people who had influence over the company's direction, that Celeste's judgment was compromised, that the evening at the Solmere had demonstrated instability, that a CEO whose personal life had become a media event was a liability to a project this sensitive. "He's not wrong that the timing is bad," Celeste said. "He's just wrong about everything else." "What are you going to do?" Darius asked. "I'm going to say the truth in a room full of people who have been told a version of the truth that suited Adrian," she said. "I'm going to do it outside in the research greenhouse in front of the people who built the project with me so that when he tries to call it emotional or unstable, everyone in that room will know what they actually saw." Darius looked at her. There was nothing fragile in her face when she said it. There was something that had been through something and had come out the other side with its edges intact, not harder exactly, but clarified. Like a hull after stripping before the first coat goes on. "And after that," he said. She looked at him steadily. "I came here first," she said, "before the meeting. That's the answer to that question." The meeting at Varden Biotech happened the following morning. Celeste had requested it herself, framing it as an operational briefing on the therapy project's next funding phase. The location was the research greenhouse, a long glass structure attached to the main building, full of growing light and the particular quiet of a space where careful work was being done. The shareholders and board members who arrived expecting a defensive posture found something different. They found Celeste standing in the middle of that light, not behind a podium, not flanked by attorneys just present and prepared. And she began by talking about the project itself, what it was, what it could become, what it would mean for the people it was designed to help. Adrian arrived with two of the shareholders he had been working. He sat where the light wasn't good and waited for an opening. He got one when the conversation turned to the gala. He used it the way he used everything, smoothly, with the tone of someone reluctantly raising a concern. He said that a leader in Celeste's position had an obligation to manage her public presence. He said the evening at Solmere had created an unnecessary distraction. He said carefully that he was only raising what several people in the room had already been privately discussing, and he named two of the shareholders present, a move designed to make Celeste feel surrounded before she responded. Celeste let him finish. Then she set a folder on the table in front of her, not opening it yet, just placing it there, and she addressed the room in the voice of someone who had decided that the most powerful thing she could do was simply be accurate. She laid out what Adrian had done, not in emotional terms, but in documented ones. The conversations he'd had with shareholders, the specific claims he had made, the timeline of his contact with board members relative to the gala, which had not been coincidental. She showed that he had known she would be at the Solmere that evening. She showed that the shareholder she had come to meet privately had been warned by Adrian not to engage with her, and that this warning had been issued 2 days before the event. She showed that his public humiliation of her had not been impulsive. It had been a step in a plan. Adrian said she was reframing a private disagreement as a conspiracy. Celeste said the documents were available for anyone who wanted to verify them. The room was quiet in the way rooms go quiet when the actual structure of something has been revealed and the performance surrounding it has become difficult to sustain. Two of the shareholders Adrian had been cultivating looked at the folder on the table and then looked at Adrian and then looked at the floor. "I don't need anyone in this room to think my personal life is easy," Celeste said. "I don't need anyone to approve of how I handled an evening that was designed to humiliate me. What I need is for the people responsible for this project to look at what I've built here and at what he attempted to do to it and decide what they're actually here to protect." Adrian made 2 more attempts to redirect. One focused on the project timeline, one returning to the question of Celeste's leadership stability. Neither landed. The room had shifted, and he was the last one in it to acknowledge the shift, which was its own kind of answer about his judgment. By the end of the meeting, the 2 shareholders he had positioned as allies had distanced themselves. The board agreed to an independent review of the claims in Celeste's folder. Adrian left without the outcome he had arrived expecting. Celeste stayed until the last person had gone. She stood alone in the greenhouse for a few minutes in the quiet, growing light and let the morning be what it was. Not a victory in the way victories were supposed to feel clean and satisfying, but something more complicated and more real. She had told the truth in a room that had been prepared to disbelieve her, and it had been enough. Not because truth always won, but because she had said it clearly without shrinking, without trading herself down to make it easier to receive. She thought about what Darius had said on the dock just days ago now, though it already felt like it had happened in a different season. She thought about the way he had walked across that garden, not running, not performing, just moving steadily toward the thing that needed doing. She picked up her bag and walked out of the greenhouse into the full morning light, and she drove north along the lake road toward Marrow Bay. The summer festival arrived the way it did every year without fanfare. as if the town had simply decided that the water and the season and the people were enough of an occasion on their own. Colored flags ran along the dock. Small vendors lined the path from the road to the shoreline. The restored boats were displayed along the water's edge, each one representing months of patient work from the craftspeople who lived and worked in the valley around the lake. Darius had brought the cedar runabout. It sat on its trailer at the edge of the water, its pale hull bright in the afternoon sun, the brass fittings catching the light the way they were built to. He was standing beside it when he saw Celeste come through the entrance at the top of the path. She was wearing something simple, a sundress the color of late summer, no jewelry, her hair loose in the lake breeze. She was carrying sunflowers, the kind sold at the farm stand at the edge of town, wrapped in brown paper. She moved through the crowd without the careful composure of the gala, without the controlled stillness of the dock. She moved like a person who had somewhere to be and was glad to be going there. A few people recognized her. There was the expected murmur, the turning of heads, the whispered exchange between two couples near the vendor tables. Celeste registered it and kept walking. When she reached Darius, she handed him the sunflowers without preamble, and the simplicity of the gesture, no speech, no explanation, just flowers given by one person to another in a place they'd both chosen to be, made him smile in a way he hadn't expected. Someone nearby asked him who she was. Darius looked at the person who had asked, and then he looked at Celeste, and she was already looking at him steady and unhurried, the lake behind her catching the afternoon light. "She's with me," he said. It was the same 3 words he had said at the Solmere in a garden full of people who had decided what she was worth before he arrived. But here, standing on the dock of a small-town festival with sunflowers in his hand, and the sound of the water moving easy and slow beneath the boards, the words carried nothing defensive in them. No shield, no correction, no argument against a crowd's verdict. Just a man telling a simple and complete truth about where he stood. Celeste reached out and took his hand. Not because she needed steadying, not because someone had told her she couldn't stand on her own, but because she wanted to. And that wanting was clean and uncomplicated in a way that very few things in her life had ever been, and she had decided she was done pretending that clean and uncomplicated things were somehow less serious than difficult ones. The festival moved around them, music from the far end of the dock, the smell of grilled food and lake water, the easy noise of a town spending a summer afternoon being exactly what it was. Darius held her hand and didn't say anything more, because there wasn't anything more that needed saying. The cedar boat sat in the sun behind them, fully restored, worth every hour it had taken, and the lake ran wide and bright all the way to the far shore. A strong woman is not hard to love. She is only hard to diminish. The people who call her unlovable are simply the ones who needed her smaller, because her full size reminded them of everything they had never been willing to become. Love that asks you to shrink is not love. It is management. And real love, the kind that holds your hand before it knows your name, the kind that walks away to keep itself honest, the kind that shows up on a Thursday morning with no plan except to be true, that kind does not ask you to be less. It simply stays long enough to see who you actually are. That is the only thing worth staying for. If this story found something real in you, if you've ever stood in a garden full of people and felt entirely alone, or if you've ever been the person who decided to cross the room, this channel is for you. Subscribe and hit the bell so these stories reach you when they're new. And if someone in your life needs to hear that they are not hard to love, share this with them. Sometimes a story is the most honest thing we can offer each other.